Hi, and welcome back to MR Realities. This is Dave McCaughan coming from Bangkok with my good friend Kevin Gray up there in Tokyo. MR Realities is an audio podcast we put out where we talk to some of the leaders in market research around the world about trends and new things happening. And today we're really lucky we've got Bob Lederer. So, Kevin, maybe you want to give us an introduction.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Kevin Gray. Bob Lederer, we're very pleased to have with us. If you don't know Bob Lederer, you're not in marketing research. So that's about as simple as that. Bob, thanks for coming.
Well, you're very kind. It's my pleasure to go international.
Yeah. You're global and extraterrestrial too. I have a fairly broad contact base, as I'm reminded sometimes. So Bob, a lot of people, they know of you. They listen to, your podcast, your daily podcast, but they don't know anything. Everything else about you is, well, they may not know. So could you just give us very briefly some background?
Sure. Let me give you a little background about me personally and professionally. Yeah. Professionally, sure. I've been in the research industry for 25 years. Started out by publishing one newsletter in the market research industry, and I'm very proud of the fact that we were the first in our industry to point out the fact that new technologies, and this is pre-internet, and new methodologies and such could really revolutionize any industry. And I'd had a couple of experiences that made that point in two different industries, in my previous time before I got into this business. So since 1995, we've been publishing first 1 and 2 and 3, and then there were 4 market research newsletters, which we've cut back to 3. And the newsletters are Research Business Report, which was the publication that really made the point that, for instance, the internet could revolutionize market research, even though I got a lot of abuse from very traditional people back in the mid-90s about the internet for research. Are you crazy? That's not just a bunch of geeks. And it's not scientific, it's not statistically valid, and blah, blah, blah. We had a second publication called Research Conference Report, which for 20 years covered conferences around the world and provided summaries of the best speeches that we either heard or got wind of. We actually did away with that publication about 4 years ago. The third publication that we started was called Research Department Report. It also exists today, and basically it does profiles of well-run research departments at all kinds of companies around the world. And the fourth publication that we do is called Pharma Market Research Report. It has to do with market research in the pharmaceutical, the healthcare, the biotech, and the medical device industries. And it's the only publication of its kind. In 2012, after hearing from a lot of my readers of my newsletters that they didn't really want to wait 30 days anymore to get hold of information about what was changing and going on in the industry, and clearly they didn't have to because the internet was, really running wild, I decided that I needed to do something communications-wise that would be much more frequent than, a printed newsletter, which I continue to this day, but I rolled out and started to do the video that most people today are familiar with, and it's called Research Business Daily Report. And the idea these days is to come up with one particular news item or develop a commentary of my own about what I see going on in the market research industry. So that's kind of my professional research background. I've worked in journalism most of my career, but I've also been in marketing and sales for the NutraSweet company and for Royal Crown Cola. And that's kind of my professional background. Personally, I grew up in New York. I've been in Chicago since 1983. When I'm not paying attention to market research, I'm an avid New York sports fan, even though I live in Chicago. And I actually published a book last year about the 1969 Super Bowl Jets team, the only Jets team ever to win a Super Bowl. That took a good deal of my time when I wasn't working on market research for about 3 years. And that kind of
Joe Namath and Matt Snell or Snell, whatever, yeah.
Oh yeah, Matt Snell and Don Maynard and
Don Maynard, yeah.
And it was quite a thrill to talk to these guys because as I told them, I was 16 years old when you guys won the Super Bowl. And the idea that I would ever get to really talk to you, is ridiculous. So one player who I interviewed, who was 75 years old when I talked to him, said, when you were 16, I was 25, and it would have been ridiculous for me to be spending my time talking to you in any, great depth. But I'm 75 now, and you're old. How old, Bob? And I told him I'm 65. He said, we're both senior citizens, so we've got a lot in common. And just a great.
I'll take that as being offensive. But anyway.
Yeah. Dave is very sensitive about the issue of age. I don't know why. He's a cranky old guy.
Oh well,
no, I'm a cranky middle-aged guy, Kevin.
Okay. Well, before we turn off the audience, then maybe we should revert to our discussion theme, which is marketing research, which is old and young at the same time. It's like sometimes parts of it are. Forgive me for saying this, Dave, a geezer. Others are in its infant stage. Others are adolescent. There's so many different aspects and corners of marketing research, and things are happening and many trends. So you wanted today to share your thoughts on some trends you think are important and whether you think they're going to persist or not. So would you like to start off with that, Bob?
Yeah, the big trend, and there are several that I really have my heart and my mind wrapped around. But the big one is, despite the fact that I was the first guy in this industry to talk about how technology could revolutionize everything and became a huge proponent of the internet and of online communities and of mobile research decades before these things really caught on, I think we've got too much technology in the industry today. I think it's overwhelming us, and I think it's also becoming a situation where there's an awful lot of Me Too technology being rolled out on a regular basis. As a journalist in the industry, I get, as you can imagine, email quite often from companies that are telling me they've developed, product X, which is revolutionary and does this and does that. And all too often I respond back to the PR agency that sent me this and tell them or ask them to please ask their client to tell them to tell me, how is this really different from what's already out there? It's not that you can't come up with new technology that can revolutionize things, but I just don't see an awful lot of real revolutionary change.
Yeah, I see that too. It's sort of like there's, someone has some little wrinkle on something, whatever. So there, I noticed that. And also, there are a lot of websites I look at, and I look at it. I've been in marketing research for more than 30 years and try to keep current. And I look at the website, and it's just jargon. And it's jargon I'd never heard before, and I don't understand. Yeah. Or it's very vague. We will do, this sort of solution, and it's like one or two sentences, and that's it. And then, maybe if you want details, you can order a white paper, which probably won't give many details and will be used for marketing purposes.
Well, and I ask them, what is this jargon? Why don't you just write it in English?
Yeah.
What is it exactly that is so different?
Bob Hoffman did a brilliant one on that recently.
Did he?
It was, tell me what you really expletive do. And it was in the B2B context, but this long thing. It was a perfect summary of like one of these profiles about somebody was loaded with, jargon about being visionaries and this and that, and all the stuff, Rob. And it was about a week or two ago. It was really brilliant, and you get a lot of that too. Someone who appears to be very self-confident. They have what they're saying is some new tool, but I don't know what it does.
Yeah.
How it's different if it's apparent, and then what it does. Oh, how is it different? Oh, we can't tell you. That's our proprietary AI.
Kevin, do me a favor and send me the link to that when you get a chance. I'd love
okay.
But that's only part of what I see that's going on. The other thing that I find offensive is that truly even new technology or new capabilities like the mobile phone, which really was in use, and we wrote about it in 2003, because it was being used in Japan, it was being used in Scandinavia, and it was being used in London at that time. In a very exploratory way, but it was being used. But I keep pointing to mobile and say, if I was a client 2 or 3 years ago, and even to some way today, and somebody came in and told me that we should do this project that needs to be done using mobile research, I would feel compelled, from what I know, to go very deep into asking them, well, have you done this with anybody else, and how has it worked, and what are its positives and what are its negatives? Because I think mobile really did itself we did a huge disfavor to mobile by not really testing and finding out how it really could best be used. They just rolled it out, and everybody that tested it became a guinea pig.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I was looking to be on the periphery of some of the R&D. I was an R&D person for Research International, which was merged into TNS about a decade ago. But we had a very clever fellow named Jamie Cattell who went on to later on to McKinsey and is now with IBM. And he was our IT guy. He was just a very bright, creative guy, and he obviously we weren't the first people to do this, but the environment here, the tech environment, was well suited to that, and they started experimenting, I think, in 1999 with it, and it was used in a limited sort of way. That you can imagine the phones and the connection and connection speed and all of that at that time really did limit it somewhat, but that was our idea here. This is really, and it's not going to substitute, or it should not substitute for, at least at that time, a PC, which often in those days was still a desktop computer with a big screen and very easy to use and navigate around. But for certain types of in situ research, it was ideal. And we ran into a lot of resistance, of course, because the screens were very small and slow and all that. But yeah, I was sort of, I didn't really contribute very much other than some evaluations of it. But yeah, I can remember those days. 20 years ago.
Hey, I can remember going back, it would be 1994, I guess, and we were doing surveys on pages across half a dozen Asian nations. And because at the time, of course, that pages were the mobile technology of the masses. And we were actually getting people to answer in what we now would call emojis, because I don't know if you guys remember, and you probably had pages back in the early 90s. But, people got into this habit of sort of using the cursors, et cetera, different symbols to create smiley faces, et cetera. So we were doing very simple surveys, getting people to respond to those things. I guess, but, to your point, Bob, I can remember the early experiments, in Japan. I was involved in some early experiments in the late 90s, early 2000s in Japan using mobile phones, et cetera. And it is, I guess it's the nature of when a new technology first starts getting used, people jump on the first clue of it and start doing things without any due diligence to process or the best way to do it, and it becomes almost exploratory. The problem, of course, is that we now end up in a world where everybody's an expert on how to do a mobile phone survey or mobile phone research, but actually very few people are experts because it's mostly just hearsay and the dumbing down of the process.
Which is really I think quite remarkable, because how long now mobile research, particularly here in the West, has been, put to use and touted and that sort of thing. So, to me, that is really, remarkable that it hasn't really become the powerful research element that everybody thought it could be. And there are probably a half a dozen fairly novel but unproven uses, of it, so far. So, Again, I still think it's a guinea pig situation, which, if I'm the average client, I don't want to be involved with. Let somebody else be the guinea pig.
Yeah.
In fact, I'll tell you something that's really interesting. When people ask me, what's the biggest change I've seen in the industry in my 25 years? And I've always had an immediate answer and believed it, to my heart. And that is 25 years ago, if the three of us had developed the greatest new research tool that had ever been designed, we would probably have quite a bit of trouble getting anybody to test it. Except if we were willing to pay the bill to test it, and then we signed a document with the company that we were going to test it for, that agreed that we would not be allowed to tell anybody that we had done a test with P&G or what the results were. Today, if tonight the three of us came up with the best new idea in research that's ever, been developed, we could find probably a half a dozen companies to test it in the next month.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I guess it's true. Maybe it's probably true for Kevin. Certainly true for me, because I spent a quarter century with the then world's biggest ad agency and running their research and stuff across Asia. I could get things done simply because I worked for this big organization. So we would do stuff for clients, but we would actually, in a sense, do it for free as an experiment, because it was for one of our big clients, right, who were paying us in any other ways. If I'd been a standalone, or if I'd just been three guys on our own trying to get things done, yeah, people would have laughed at some of the things. I can remember doing what we called at the time mobile ethnology, but we did a study on what people ate for breakfast across 12 cities in Asia. And this must be 18 years ago. But we actually got people to use mobile phones to take photos of what they ate for breakfast and give us a one sentence of where they were eating it and what they were, the description of it, and then load it up onto a centralized site. Now, today you'd see that as a commonplace sort of idea. At the time, it was even the people that we did it for, the clients that we sort of showed it to, like, well, that's a bit of a stupid idea. Why didn't you just go out and ask people? Why didn't you send people around to photograph? Yeah, but this way we could actually get in situ and all that sort of stuff. It's interesting because things, the other side of what we're talking about is things that we experimented with or people experiment with now that might be in 15 years, you sort of go, oh, that was pretty interesting that you even tried that. But there's a gap between interesting trial and then things becoming, I'm trying to think of the right words, like, definable, sort of known knowns from sort of, yeah, that's interesting, to something that you go, yeah, that's really thought through. You've actually done the experiments. You've done the thinking, and you've come up with a really solid case for why this is effective. I guess maybe more and more in the world, we just live in a world where people don't do that. They just jump straight to cheap trials,
Yeah, I think part of it, Bob, you touched on earlier was when you mentioned the internet and the resistance to that, and I remember that very well. There's less interest in methodology now and in statistical inference for whatever reason. A lot of people just don't think about it. I think that was always kind of misplaced anyway, because big decisions were made on the basis of 4 focus groups or 120 shopping mall intercept interviews. So that's not very
Kevin, let me
probability.
Let me ask you, because this is kind of your area of expertise. There certainly has been a lessening of standards from the most traditional things that we were accustomed to in the 90s and well before that. But how much damage do you think that's done, to the research world, if much at all? As a result of that?
It's really hard to say. It's kind of, I guess what I miss is the mentality and the awareness that, okay, this is not, it's not that it's not perfect. There are some serious flaws with what we're doing, and we need to be able to account for this or consider this when we're interpreting our results, like, for example, from a mall intercept survey with a small sample. But so I think there's that aspect of it. I guess it's just frankly, a lack of awareness of some of these basic statistical issues, which concern me. And I think there are going to be some problems, and there have been some problems. And data science, very broadly defined, is frequently criticized on those grounds by statisticians for the misuse of statistical methods and lack of awareness of these sort of basic things like probability sampling and all that. So it's kind of like, my feeling is that the good old days never really were. But on the other hand, you did have a lot of people who understood research well, and also came from backgrounds like social psychology, psychology, anthropology, sociology, and I see less of that, or imagine, perhaps, it could be just my perception, less of it now.
So do you see it as a misnomer to think of making research grading?
I would say that yeah, I think there are certain basics, I think, that are missing, that should be instilled. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's sort of like, I can't be nostalgic about, the old days. If you wanted to do like a detailed usage and attitude survey, you had to, at the end of the day, you couldn't do it in several phone calls. Some people would try to do that. There was no internet. You had to do a postal survey at one time or another. And they would, often be, take a long time to fill out. Response rates were very low. Well, there was tons of missing data. If you did part of the survey initially by telephone, and then use that to recruit, there was a lot of big drop off very often, and it. So yeah, I mean there's and also the technology that we had, the computers and the software we had for analyzing data really was. I wouldn't want to say Stone Age. We could do some pretty cool things, but I wouldn't want to go back. No way.
Yeah. So let me kind of turn the tables, being a journalist and all.
Yeah, you're the pro.
Yeah. What do you think the industry is going to end up, if at all, doing about the friction between the data analytics side inside companies and the research side, which, from everything I can tell, are kept pretty independent of one another, and to me, oddly, and I don't quite understand it, deliberately so.
Yeah, there are these turf battles that don't make a lot of sense, where you do have people doing marketing research related analytics and marketing related analytics who don't report to marketing. I think it's part of it is, marketing and marketing research went through a period where they were, in many companies, downsized or were not expanded to the extent that they should have been. And at the same time, you had the growth of data warehousing and direct marketing, and then CRM and these sorts of things. That momentum had been there for a long time, and it started really to build in the latter half of the 90s. And so you have a lot of people, you're right, who are doing these sorts of analytics, and I think it should be part of marketing, but they're for organizational purposes, they're separate. Now, why that is, I think part of it is turf, part of it is culture too. A lot of your operations people are compared to us pretty no nonsense folks, right? And very numbers oriented, and they I'm talking too much. Sorry. They often view marketers as kind of pie in the sky, or almost hippie types or whatever, with the pop psychology and all that. So some of that criticism is surely deserved.
Yeah, I think to take Kevin's point, I mean, one of the issues that I've certainly noted, and it's been interesting in some conversations the last few months, it's come up a lot, is this thing that people, a lot of companies marketing is actually more and more limited to marketing communications, or the perception of marketing is about marketing communications. And so what's interesting is that in a lot of organizations, you have sort of what was the marketing department is now just basically the marketing communications department. And so they're not actually integrating with whatever the data collection is that happening in the greater company, because they're actually they're creating a role that is not really about marketing. It's not really about finding out what is the best thing to go to the market with. It's about, or how do we actually say it? And so they're only looking at limited sets of data. But what I'm finding interesting is two things. Just in the last few weeks, I've had a couple of conversations with people that are setting up new organizations that are either within companies or are servicing companies that are basically all about the reconjoining of market research and the big data or data analytics or whatever you want to call it, and about how to reconsider putting all these things back together. Because I think in a lot of organizations that as they got into more and more, I'll use the term big data, don't take it in bad terms, I'm using it generically, but in a lot of organizations, they're starting to realize, well, even if we start figuring out ways in which we can analyze this data, we're not too sure what we're analyzing it for. And so they're re-looking at that in terms of how can we make sure that it's fitting certain application needs. And maybe that'll see a change, so that what we're talking about will start to turn around a bit. But
well, that would be a revolutionary change for any company to try to undertake a task like that. Not only because, hey, they've got a business to run and numbers to make for a quarter, but, just the effort.
Well, it's interesting. Sorry, I should say it's interesting you say that, Bob, because the companies that I'm hearing this sort of story from are mostly of two types. One, they're not American companies, and so they tend to be either Japanese or Indian or Chinese companies that don't work on the Wall Street crush, and a lot of them are actually very large privately owned companies. So, it's an interesting thing you say that, because I've got a feeling that the American model of, publicly owned, driven by Wall Street companies, and the quarterly figures, the quarterly Wall Street reporting, etc. We know that sort of stops development in a lot of ways. It stops broad thinking in a lot of ways, because it's all about then day-to-day profiteering, right? And so it's interesting, perhaps coming from, and I'm not trying to be Asia biased because I live out here, but maybe it just happens. There's a lot of these large sort of like privately held companies across Japan, China, India, or companies that, the Japanese model of reporting, they don't do the quarterly crush as such, even the big public companies. And we go back and forwards and have 15 podcasts about the rights and wrongs of Japanese companies and the way they work. But the fact is that those organizations then are maybe a little bit freer to rethink about what are they going to do with all this stuff. And it's just interesting. I've been talking to a couple of people that are in basically don't want to talk about it publicly, but in startup stages of trying to put together, coming from market research backgrounds, but trying to put together advisories to these companies on how to rethink how to use data for long-term objective building, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be interesting.
There's been an interest in that. I think a lot of it is, again, it's budget organization issues with internal data. The data we need are not always there. They have tons of data, but a lot of it announced as useful. There's also in many companies kind of very much I don't want to call it necessarily an engineering mentality, a product oriented philosophy or mindset where we design and build good products, and the assumption is then those good products, because they're so good, we think they're so good, they'll sell themselves. Maybe run some TV ads or whatever. Have good a good sales force that has good relationships with key distributors and retailers and whatever. That's all you need. Further up the funnel, they don't care about as much often. Although it's hard to generalize because very often in R&D people from clients, engineers, chemists, whatever, show up in focus groups.
Yep. Yeah.
As clients. So it's difficult for, at least for me, to generalize.
Yeah. Hey, Bob, turning the tables again, maybe we should switch to what's the one thing that you are looking at happening or about to happen in market research that you're really excited about?
Wow. You know what a pregnant pause is?
You're gonna have twins or triplets.
You guys both probably knew Larry Gold, who was the editor at Inside Research for years and years and years. And he beat me. Well, he was in the industry for a long time, but he beat me to a newsletter 5 years before I started mine. And Larry developed a reputation as a real curmudgeon. He would put out his newsletters and he would say, I was at such and such a conference and I heard speeches about this and this and this and this, and yawn. How many more times am I going to have to listen to the same garbage over and over again before somebody really tells me something that is a game changer? Well, Larry died about 4 years ago. And since that time, I've taken up the responsibility of trying to be the curmudgeon of the industry that's known for. I can't think really of one thing that truly excites me at this point about, something I see happening on the horizon. I'll tell you what one of my keen interests is. However, I'll give you that. I don't think you have necessarily the same problem in your part of the world, but here, people tend to fall into their first research job. I think I've met 5 people in 25 years who told me that as they were growing up, they knew they wanted to go into the research business. People come out of college or out of high school, whatever, and they just land a job with a research agency or a research supplier. And they stay there, really for the rest of their careers. And so one of the things I have been really pushing, and nobody is buying it, is the fact that here we have a great opportunity to stimulate and actually turn on, high school and even college kids about the possibilities of working in the research industry, whether it's, for statistical purposes or for data science purposes or for, pure market research or psychology or anthropology, whatever. Because again, we tend not to get the cream of the crop in those areas because we've never really made a concerted effort to try to get people early on before they've made career decisions.
What I run into a lot in data science or my corner of marketing research is you have people in data science who are very focused on programming, and they're very good at these sort of narrow things. And really any kind of data is the same, other than its quote unquote physical characteristics. Marketing data, data from biology, financial data, they're all the same. They're all thinking about management and data wrangling and these types of things. And so they get into it and they don't have any background at all in marketing or marketing research. They think it's easy. It's just like any other data, but they have no understanding of really what the data is. I'm exaggerating here a bit. What the data mean, how it can be used, and how to interpret it. There's often just a lack of interest to begin with in that.
Yeah.
So I think that's it's good and bad. We have a lot of very talented technical people now working in or around marketing research, but that old, the anthropology, sociology, social psychology, that sort of perspective and knowledge and scholarship is increasingly, I sense, missing.
It's interesting you raised that one, Bob, because late last year, maybe this is just because I'm Australian and therefore by definition I'm a cynic, but late last year I was I got asked to look at a couple of people I know in different Asian countries had sent me the CVs of young people who were just graduating graduate school or something, and about, hey, they'd really love to get a job in market research. Can you have a look at their CV and give them some recommendations? And my comments back were, really? They're interested in market research? So that probably sums up that sums up the problem for a start, right? And certainly, I got into it totally by accident in my early 30s. So, but the other side of that is that, maybe connected to that episode last year, whatever, but it just happens that this year I've sort of rejoined the committee for the local market research society here in Thailand that I founded a long, long time ago. And they've given me the job of sort of what do we do about marketing the industry? So we're doing the old-fashioned thing. We're setting up seminars inside universities about why market research matters, and just taking it to different schools inside the universities.
My proposal that I have run past the ARF, who said not interested, and the all the other associations here, there's not one of them that bought my idea at all. And what my idea basically was to create first of all, a market research 101 course in as many different universities as we possibly could, just to start. And within a matter of years, perhaps create a minor in it. And then after that, try to create a major in it.
Yep.
And the basic for a course already exists, because Michigan State University has an excellent graduate program that teaches the basics of research. And I talked with him, and he said, sure, this could easily be adapted for undergraduate work and that sort of thing. So I'll just finish it real quick. My idea was to approach universities on a very local and regionalized basis with local people, local agencies, local client research people, and that sort of thing, and bring them the materials to run the course, and offer them the incentive of saying, hey, we will guarantee X number of internships, over the summer, for the best students in each university.
That's an idea, I think.
Yeah, it's what. Hey, you're the first one who thinks it is.
No, it's a great idea. It's a great idea. It's not. Look, this is where it's maybe more advanced than what I was thinking here in Bangkok, but. Tried those sorts of things a little bit in the past when I was inside a big company, and it sort of works. I mean, I managed to find great people by setting up, paying for people to do courses. And I think that's not a bad idea, and it's certainly, at least on a local level here in Thailand, I'm going to try and push that. So thanks for getting us somewhere with that.
The idea really germinated because GFK, for about 5 or 6 years, had a contest here in the state. That any university could develop any kind of a market research project, and JFK would award, a gold, award to the best project. And each year I would interview, the 4 or 5 undergrads, the kids, about their experience with research, and they all had varied backgrounds and interests insofar as research. And by that I mean, one guy I remember as part of a team was a statistician, and another person there handled creating the questionnaire, and another person was kind of an anthropological type person, and all of them had a keen interest in going into research as a career, having had the experience of doing this sort of thing. So that really convinced me that the opportunity was there to try to attract young talent to the industry, and the cream of the crop, really, at that, if you got them in a good situation. So I'm glad.
Yeah. It would be interesting. It would be interesting to go back now and find out, how those young people actually progressed. Yeah, what they ended up doing.
Well, if they get into the business, and of course it depends on where they are, and boutiques, I think, are an excellent excellent place to learn as well too. And if they find it's not for them, then that's fine. I mean, that's the reality. That's part of what internships are for. Hopefully, we want to entice good, young people to enter the profession and to stay. And also, I think we need more return migration. A lot of times, what happens is they work for for a supplier for 2 to 3 years, and they move to the client side and never come back, and never bring that learning with them. And I think that there should be some more back and forth.
Well, we'll go
run a little bit.
We'll go to my bugbear, Kevin, which is that when we say internships, let's make sure that internships are restricted to anybody of any age.
Okay.
We should be encouraging more interns in their 60s.
In a way, that's good because geezers are the only people who know what they're talking. Never trust anyone under 60.
Okay, I'm about to blow my stack at the continued use of the G word here, Kevin. But off we go.
Rhymes with gray. Bob, is there anything before we wrap up? There any other would you like to stick your neck out and say and predict what is you have strong confidence is going to be a big hit, will be with us in say 5 years, or conversely it's likely to bomb?
I'm generally an optimist about stuff because I think that there are enough forward-looking people that want to make things better. And so I brought up the issue before about the schism between the data analytics folks and the research folks inside companies. And I'm looking forward to watching that be resolved, because I think it is going to be resolved. Smart people inside companies realize the strengths that each of those two areas, bring to a situation. And so, I'm hoping that it's going to happen sooner rather than later. I'll tell you a story, and that I know you're running short on time, but about 5 years ago, I went to a research conference run by one of the big associations here in the States. And the president of the association, sat alongside me and said, "Hey, what's going on?" We kibitzed a little bit, and he said, "You got any ideas for me about how we could increase the association and make it even more valuable and grow the number of members?" I said, "Yeah." And again, this is about 5-6 years ago. I said, it's a cliche, but everybody knows, the famous words in the movie The Graduate, when the graduate was recommended to look at plastics. And I said to this guy, a pure research guy, I said, data analytics. Those people don't have anywhere to go, and they're looking for a place to go, to come together and be represented. And I said, think of the power you could have in bringing them together once or twice a year with some of the smartest market research people in the industry at the same time. And he looked at me and he didn't get it. He just didn't get it, which amazed me. But
5 or 6 years ago, maybe. Yeah, I wonder about if you try that now.
Data analytics was really even catching on. Data science was clearly on an upswing. And there were even, constant reports about the need that was going to very, very disproportionately develop over the years for these kind of talented people, and that there wouldn't be enough of them around to fill jobs. So the last thing I would just like to offer to anybody that is listening, if you don't know what I do, if you go to YouTube at youtube.com/RBDR channel, you can watch to your heart's delight 7 years of videos of me talking about the research industry day after day after day after day. And if that doesn't really get yourself going, well, I'm sorry, there's nothing else I can offer.
Is that a threat or?
Yes, it is.
Hey, but I think you may have one final question.
Bob, Bob, I finish all of our podcasts. All of our guests, regardless of what they do, get the same question. When you think back to all your years being involved in market research and commentating and reporting on it, what's the one question that you didn't ask that you wish you had?
That I didn't? You mean of myself or of people in the industry?
Whatever. What's the one question that you didn't ask that you wish you had?
Wow. Well, I'll tell you the question I've asked that I've always asked and never gotten enough answers to, and that is, how do I get you to subscribe to my newsletters?
Yeah, fair enough.
That's a useful answer.
Yes, a very self-serving question.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough.
We're marketing guys, right?
Good
Okay,
one.
well,
Okay.
Thanks so much, then.
Thanks, Bob. It's been great.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you guys, and I'd love to do it again. I appreciate your interest and your time.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.